Okay, I think, does it say that? Yeah, we're recording. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and we're very excited to see you when the synchronous sessions start in October. So this afternoon, I'm speaking with Christina Stewart, who is an archivist at the Media Commons, who's worked very closely with the Mastrangelo Collection, which is this amazing collection of Italian language films. And she's going to be speaking to you about that and the connection between the collection and some of the Fellini films that we're going to be discussing today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Fellini's distribution in Canada and the popularity or lack of popularity in certain communities and the history of Italian art house cinema, particularly focused in Toronto. We had originally wanted to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into some of the distribution, but with COVID-19 and some of the closure of the archives, we're going to be doing more of a general overview, and hopefully in the future I'll be able to do a little bit more of an in-depth research into this topic. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me just get to the next slide. So in Toronto, we have a little bit of a different situation than what happened in the United States with art house cinema. So art house cinema proved to be quite unpopular in Toronto. One of the famous examples was when the Bicycle Thieves opened up. The theater that opened up the Bicycle Thieves had sort of financial ruin because not many people came to see those films. So in the early 1950s and throughout the 1950s, we see in the city Italian language cinemas pop up. And one of the first was the Studio Theater. And a lot of these cinemas originally marketed themselves both for the art house community and for the popular Italian crowd. So something that we have to really keep in mind that many people might not be aware is that we had this huge influx of post-war immigrants to Toronto, and many of them wanted to see films from Italy. So these neighborhood theaters that developed, that grew out of these communities, wanted to appeal to both this immigrant population, but also some of the population in the city that were interested in seeing European cinema, particularly those associated with the University of Toronto. So the Studio Cinema was located very close to the University of Toronto, which is also located near Little Italy. So the student newspaper, The Varsity, would often report on, particularly on Fellini films that came and opened up in the city, because those were some of the only films that were actually had English subtitles. Many of the other films, and Christina might talk about this a little bit later, in terms of the collection, did not have English subtitles. But when Fellini films opened up in Canada, they generally had subtitles, and the Varsity newspaper noted, they were really interested in seeing more art house cinema in Canada, and they noted that it was really only the Italian circuit that had these films, and particularly Fellini films were some of the most popular. So I just wanted to go a little bit more in detail about the Italian language cinemas in Toronto and where they were located. So we have a lot of Italian language cinemas. Many times there were sometimes up to 10 cinemas operating, and they were scattered throughout the city. A lot of them were originally focused around that Little Italy area that also had, as I mentioned, the connection to the University of Toronto. But then as this community started to move into the suburbs and in North Toronto, then many of the cinemas also moved with the community. And here are some of the maps that I have done with Paul Moore at Ryerson on the Italian language cinemas in Toronto. And here we go. You can see into the 70s and 80s how the theaters are moving into the suburbs with the community. So as I mentioned, Italian art house cinema and other types of films that were actually quite popular in places in the United States were not as popular in the Toronto case, and also in some other communities in Canada that I've looked at, in Montreal and in Vancouver. A lot of the films that were that the community wanted to view were comedies, Italian westerns, and also certain sexually provocative films were also quite popular and often advertised in the Italian language newspaper. So to get a little bit to the Mastrangelo Collection, which Christina will talk about, Rocco Mastrangelo was one of the largest distributors in the city, and he was involved in several different theaters in Toronto, including the Radio City. And interestingly enough, he reflected in an interview about sort of the lack of popularity of certain types of Italian cinema. And he actually particularly mentioned Fellini, that he really wanted to bring more Fellini films to the city, but he found that audiences weren't as interested in them as they were in the comedies and the Italian westerns and those types of films. I've also done a little bit of preliminary research on newspaper records throughout Canada on the different types of advertising for Fellini films, and this is just sort of a small collection that you can see of ads that I found. And primarily, a lot of the Fellini advertisements were found actually in the English language newspapers, not so much in the Corriere Canadese, which was the Italian language newspaper in Toronto. And they were appealing to the sort of English audience. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Christina now to talk a little bit more about the media commons and the Mastrangelo Collection and the films themselves.
Hi, everyone. So before we get into the Mastrangelo Collection, I just want to say a few words about the Media Commons Archives. We are a department of the University of Toronto Libraries and are currently the largest repository of archival and contemporary audiovisual resources in any Canadian university. Our mandate is to support the teaching of the university and research at the university with media-based materials. We do this by acquiring, preserving, and making available archival and special collection material of Canadian and international significance related to media communities, the entertainment industry, popular culture, in addition to serving the university community, we are also open to external researchers and the general public. Since our founding in 2003, the archives have built up a collection of over 100 unique full and collections dating from the 1870s to the present. The areas we cover include film, radio, television, music, photography, animation, and advertising. And all of this leads to the Mastrangelo Collection. This was a very large donation of materials from their Toronto and Montreal offices. 5 years ago, we received the initial acquisition of the Toronto materials, which consisted of over 3,700 video masters and over 5,000 reels of 35mm distribution prints. And then roughly 3 years ago, we received the materials from the Montreal office. And again, this included another large donation of videotape masters and 35mm distribution prints. The materials from Toronto date primarily from the late 1960s through to the 1980s, while those from Montreal date from roughly the mid-1950s through the early 1970s. These are almost all Italian language features, but also include trailers, short subjects, and newsreels. Due to the size of the collection, we are currently still processing these materials. Okay, next slide.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. No, we can stay on that slide.
Oh, back.
Sorry about that. This slide shows how some of the materials from the Toronto materials were stored prior to being donated to us. They were in a large basement area of a building owned by the Mastrangelos. And while in this space, the materials were subjected to water leaks and minor flooding, concrete dust, temperature fluctuations, and high humidity. Okay, next slide. This slide just shows an example of some of the now over 5,000 videotape masters we've received in this collection. Okay, next slide. So the collection also had a very large poster component to it, but these were donated to another organization, but we are to receive duplicates of these posters in the future from this organization. Okay, slide. So these materials hold a tremendous amount of archival value. In addition to being a great set of films and videos and a fantastic resource for research, the physical objects themselves tell us a lot about what Italian communities in Canada were watching during these years and about cinema in their communities, which ties directly into Jessica's research. The films give us many clues as to where and how they traveled the country for screenings. Every film reel has its original provincial censorship board band with it, which notes the original language title, the total reel count, the maker origin, distribution exchange, production code rating, and certificate number. Extra information found on the bands includes other provincial censorship board stamps from the different places where the film played throughout the country, and handwritten projection notes sometimes, and such as other theaters where these prints were screened. This information in turn can be verified on the print itself by the embossed provincial censorship stamp, usually found at the beginning and the ends of the reels. Sometimes a title can contain up to 3 separate stamps, and I've seen stamps from Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta on them. Okay, the next slide. So even the shipping cases these prints traveled the country in carry with them potentially valuable information. Shipping labels tell us the shipping companies used, the dates, the theater names, the addresses of the theaters, sometimes the theater manager or projectionist names, and sometimes the fees associated either with the shipment or the rental fee of that print. Okay, slide. As these films have transitioned from being distribution prints to archival materials, this information takes on a new significance. It lets us place a particular print at a certain place in time in history and really shows that having archival film materials is important and that they provide something extra and special that gets lost when research is done with digital versions alone. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Christina. And you know, the collection is such an amazing one. And, you know, hopefully when there's a vaccine and COVID-19 is over, more researchers can access this, and we can also sort of do a little bit more of a deeper dive into specific types of Italian film distribution, Fellini's distribution, and just use this immeasurable resource that is just so amazing for myself as a researcher and for I think many people that are going to be attending the conference. And we're very excited that everyone came and listened to our asynchronous presentation. And I'll be there on October 17th and we can answer questions that people have at 12 p.m. And thank you again to everyone for participating in the conference. And we're really excited to see you in October. Okay.